welcome to Siblings on the Spectrum. I'm Cameron,
And I'm Keystron.
and we are your siblings on the spectrum. So today we're going to talk about, of all things, a 1975 movie, an infamous or maybe famous, but maybe both, a musical from 1975 called The Rocky Horror Picture Show. Now, some people may be wondering, well, why have you chosen this particular film? So, Key, do you want to give us a little hint of what's upcoming? Why are we talking about this particular film at this point in time?
Well, it's actually a cult favorite in the queer community, and so it's something that's still being referred to constantly there. And I do drag, and a lot of every Halloween people drag with that. So it's kind of part of my cultural world, but also I found it very problematic. Like when I first saw it, even in the '80s. So I decided to do a rewrite, and I just did a fringe play called the Poppy Horror Picture Show that rewrote the Rocky Horror Picture Show from a trans perspective. So it's very much present in my life right now. I just finished that experience at the Fringe Festival.
Actually, do you find people still dress up as characters from this or Halloween? I haven't seen that in decades, actually. But
Yeah, no, it's a big deal. Like I just like last Halloween. So Halloween's a big time for drag artists and dressing up. You know, people love that time. And there's always someone who wants to do the time warp.
Right.
And someone did the Sweet Transsexual song from Rocky by Dr. Frankenfurter. Yeah, actually a drag king did it, and I actually said I'm not comfortable, I'm not going to participate because I'm a trans person and I don't think this movie accurately represents what we're doing today in the queer community, and they went ahead and did it anyways. Like there's not a lot of awareness that this movie is not just like it, they act like it's still really current and amazing and wonderful. And it's not really a movie for 2024. It is literally almost 50 years old now, isn't it? Like 1975.
1975, yeah.
Yeah, 1975.
Ahead of
So
its time. We'll talk about that.
it was ahead of its time. Yeah, it's now like it's interesting almost 50 years later, people are still acting like it's, fresh.
Mhm.
There's some problems with it, but I mean there is some interesting content as well.
Yeah, I remember. I haven't seen anyone dress up like that in ages, but I used to go to the Dance Cave in Toronto for the retro nights, and they used to always play Time Warp, and everyone knew all the moves and followed along with them. I think that was the last time. What was that? That was the early noughties, like 2002. That's the last time I saw anyone mimicking Rocky Horror Picture Show. But I live way up in the wilderness, so there's not much call for the Rocky Horror Picture Show up here, I'm afraid. But let's actually talk about, we mentioned the film was made in 75. Should we talk about our first impressions when we first came across this movie?
Yeah, because I think that it's interesting you mentioned that people were it was played at a dance club. I actually first experienced it at a Much Music Video dance party for Halloween.
In
Uh,
Goderich?
yeah, in Goddard when I was at grade
At
9. I actually
GDCI, the high
I
school.
yeah, I actually have a photo of me clutching the ticket, and I have you standing behind me. Want me to share it? I can try to share it here. If you
Okay, yeah, we can try to share that.
can you see that?
It's starting. Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, so there's I don't think you dressed up that year, Cameron.
Yeah. I
What
was a
a
teenager.
terrible.
I had issues with skincare, yes.
Yes, yeah, it's really, we all went through that awkward phase, right? And I
I
obviously
remember
didn't.
that well. That was one of the I think that was the first, like, being autistic, I didn't go to school dances at all. I was really afraid of going, just paranoid, thought I would be unwelcomed, wasn't sure how I'd fit in, didn't really like the idea of dancing around other people. But I think this brings back a lot of memories because this was the first high school dance I ever went to. Actually, that was when Erica M did the video thing, right? That VJ came.
Yeah, yeah, Erica M came.
Right. Yeah, I remember that. I remember dancing to Love and Rockets, a few other things. And I
So
remember people going absolutely insane to Ozzy Osbourne. I thought this is too much for me.
I don't remember the Ozzy Osbourne.
I
I just
remember it really
remember,
well. I think it was
um,
Crazy Train. Anyway, go ahead.
yeah, I heard that on the radio not too long ago, actually. Um, should I stop sharing screen or you'll probably.
If you have some more reflections or memories from that
Well,
night,
actually, so I dressed up as half man, half lady, which probably told you everything you need to know. But I saw this in a Whitney Houston video, actually. How will I know? And or no, it was maybe it was I Want to Dance with Somebody. I think it was I Want to Dance with Somebody.
is that where you
Uh,
got it from? That look?
I got yeah. Well, I saw it on So Much Music was a huge it was on all the time at our house and it was a huge inspiration. There's a lot of good content on there and a lot of garbage too. But so I made this costume and there's me, I have my ticket in my hand. And I remember going and just thinking, um, first of all, I didn't realize you can't do blackface. No, just kidding. But I I don't know what I was doing with the makeup. I think I was going for a yin yang effect. And then I was wearing those horrible 80s glasses. But when I showed up, people were really they thought it was really cool, but because I was in grade 9, I didn't win best costume because I was I just it was a popularity contest and it was my first
Right.
year.
Yeah.
So I remember going to the dance and the time warp played and I was like, what is this? Everybody knows the moves and it seemed really cool and everyone danced in unison. And the actual that video clip is really cool. Like if for a Halloween, like they do the monster mash and the time warp, that's what they are. And then I don't know if they were, I think they probably did Thriller. And if I remember correctly, I think Cyndi Lauper's True Colors was the last song of the
I
night because it was,
remember Money Money by Billy Idol.
oh yeah,
And
Moni
then they
Moni.
banned that song. They banned it because people were shouting, get effed, get laid during it. Do you remember that?
Yeah, get laid,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I remember that dance. There I am. I'm wearing a mask. I guess that's
Do you think you wore it all night? Because I remember that mask. You had so much fun with that mask. I
I
was it
bought that at
Henderson?
Henderson's, a local bookstore in Godrich. I had it for years. It was really a
Was
gnarly
it
mask.
Henderson's or Fincher's?
No, Henderson's bookstore. It's no longer
Okay.
there. So no one's
Oh,
going to understand these particular memories, but this does show actually my memories are very clear going back to I was the age of 1. That's one of the features of my autism is my long-term memory is excellent, much better
mhm,
than my short-term memory. So I'm actually remembering that night. Now that you've showed that photo, I almost feel like I'm there, like physically. I
wow.
remember being awkward, standing off the side with my friend. I think he was dressed as a ninja. Anyway, we're standing off to the side and afraid to dance. I think some girls got us to dance finally. But I was very paranoid, nervous, and stressed, probably sweating buckets being there. But like you, I was looking around and thinking everyone's sort of moving together in unison, rather like fish in a school. They
Yeah,
seem to know what to do during each song. They know what to shout during Money Money. They know how to all dance to Time Warp. All moving in unison because they had those social interactions. It came so easy and naturally to them. But I found it all yeah, yeah, hard to grasp, but I was getting used to it. That was my first dance. I did enjoy it. And actually I sent you a video a while ago, I remember. Your person you're dressed as. There's also one in that Tinto Brass movie,
yeah.
called Salon Kitty. When I watched that movie and I saw that character at the very beginning doing the cabaret in the Weimar Republic of Berlin, yeah, that reminded me a lot of that character. But you got it from a Whitney Houston video.
A Whitney Houston video. I'm trying to think. I think it was I Want to Dance with Someone, but I'm not sure. I think those two songs of hers. I'll have to get back to you on that one. But
Yeah,
uh, and
I
I just
vaguely
remember
remember it.
Erica M was like when she played a slow song, she said, "Oh, look, there's half man, half lady. Who is it going to dance with?" And I was like, I at that time because it was like it was. This is 1986. I have pulled this out of my photo album, and so obviously there wouldn't have been a concept of non-binary pronouns, but I was like, oh my god. At the time, I was just mortified she called me out, and I do remember not understanding how Moni, everybody seemed to know to yell, hey, get laid, get,
Yeah,
and why are they doing this? It makes no sense really. Like, who decided this? But then I was like, okay,
Yeah,
I'm gonna, because I want to fit in, you know?
yeah, it's tribal. It's something for other people, they all just like I said, it's like a flock of birds all moving together, or a school of fish. People seem to be able to join these tribes. And the Rocky Horror Picture Show is very tribal, actually. It's we'll talk about that, but they all seem to be able to move in unison so easily. So well, this is an interesting picture to bring up. It brings back a lot of memories. So
Yeah, well,
let's talk about when sorry, go ahead.
I'll scan it and send it to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks. Let's talk about when we first became aware of the Rocky Horror Picture Show, because the movie came out in 75. Now, I remember when it came out, I remember reading about it in the newspaper in the mid 70s, and I remember seeing the trailers, seeing the footage of people queuing up for it. And I guess one of the features of my autism, I'm very suspicious of anything that's popular.
Mhm.
Like if I'm listening to a certain band and suddenly they become big, I will drop that band in the 80s. Like for example, In Excess, I used to really like them, the first two or three albums, especially the swing. Then when they got popular, I forgot about them. It was like that for a lot of bands, actually. But I saw the Rocky Horror Picture Show as being too popular. It was, and I saw it as being sort of a rite of passage that people were going through to, it's sort of like seeing certain movies like The Godfather or The Deer Hunter, where if you see that movie, you go in one way and you come out looking at the world totally differently. I saw it as a transition movie that somehow it had that power, that it's a very awesome, powerful experience that's going to change you somehow. Like if you watch The Godfather or The Deer Hunter, you're suddenly going when you're finished watching it, you're moving towards becoming an adult. So that's the way I viewed the Rocky Horror Picture Show, as something very popular, curiously, even though it's quite alternative in its views and its presentation. And also, I didn't like Meatloaf at all. I thought Meatloaf was the apex of popularity. So I don't know if you remember this. Our parents used to take disco dancing lessons around this
I
time.
remember
And
they went,
they
I
had,
remember
I think they had
friends.
a Meatloaf album or a Meatloaf song. So that was yet another reason why Meatloaf was, no, sorry, can't listen to it because the parents are into it. So I never expressed interest in the Rock Horror Picture Show. I thought it was something I would best avoid. I mean, I never actually even tried eating meatloaf until 1991. So it
Oh
took me a
my
long
God.
time. Now actually, I don't mind meatloaf. Like I can realize he has a great voice and great production. So and he was a good actor too, the late Meatloaf, good actor. So I appreciate him more. But that was my first experience seeing it, and then I mean seeing the trailers and getting some idea that this is sort of some rite of passage amongst people. I mean, at the time I didn't know I was autistic, but it was, a rite of passage amongst neurotypicals. So it's something you needed to experience, maybe to just dabble your toes in alternative culture, you know?
Yeah.
Like some people dabble in alternative, sort of like why people now like Depeche Mode. Back in the day, I was a huge, huge fan. There's another group that my interest sort of tapered off in, but I think Depeche Mode is one of those bands that allows you to dabble in darker alternative culture just a little bit, but
Yeah.
still be still be neurotypical, be a normie, so to speak. But anyway, I finally did see Rocky Horror Picture Show when I was in university, so that's a good time to see it because in university, eccentricity is really celebrated. So even though I didn't know I was autistic, I had lots of friends in university. It was really great. So we all dressed up and went to the Rock Horror Picture Show. I dressed as a Joker. I'll have to see if I have some pictures of that. I do.
The Joker.
Yeah, I went as a Joker because I had the short spiked hair I used to have, and I dyed it all, sprayed it all green with some.
But is there a Joker in the movie, or you just went as the
No, I
Joker
just
for
went as a
Batman?
Joker. No, I went as because Batman came out that year, I think.
Oh,
Tim Burton's Batman, I think. Was it that year? I think it was. Yeah, I think it was because I
I
saw it
think
in '89. It was
people dress
80.
up as when they go to see it as characters from that movie. So I find it
There
really
was
funny that
some.
you dressed up as something completely different.
Well, I think the person I came with, she dressed as a nurse or something, I think. So there
Oh,
was people dressed as different things, but I enjoyed it. I was surprised everyone was shouting and yelling, at the screen because initially when I first saw, but once again back in the mid '70s when I first became aware of the all the rage about the film, I thought, how can you scream and yell at a movie picture screen. You're not going to be able to pay attention to the movie because I have to be in a theater that's totally quiet to focus because as it is, my attention span goes all over the place, and sometimes I lose track of the dialogue and
Yeah.
certain things I have trouble hearing. So I wondered how can you enjoy the movie, but it's not really about that. It's about the experience. So yeah, I was part of the throwing stuff at the screen, and we were all having a drink and stuff like that. And so it was a good experience. So my first experience with it being at university and being in that, interesting sort of a safe environment, it would be a safe environment to express myself. So I felt good about it. I enjoyed it. But what was your first experience with the movie?
Well, so after I saw it in grade nine, it became on my radar, and I just started. I knew that there was something queer about it, obviously. Um, I think that you actually like you see enough like in even the time warp that there's a lot of alternatively dressed people, and I was there dressed as half man, half lady, so that
Yeah,
obviously the gender bending aspect of it really appealed to me. But back then you couldn't just stream it, obviously, so I was just hoping to get a chance to see it someday. And I think I don't know if I rented it from the library. I doubt that. Sometimes you could get um I think that it actually came on City TV, late great movies.
I don't think the
So
Godrich Library has it. No.
they actually had Spike Lee and stuff. I remember getting Spike Lee movies and
Oh yeah,
stuff.
I've seen Spike
She's
Lee
got to
one.
have it. Like they did have some. You could get some pretty interesting stuff. They didn't, because I think it's controlled from outside of Godrich. But anyway, um, yeah. So, and I was really excited to watch it because I was like, yeah, this is going to be really. I was trying to find out more about people like me, which was I was a gender minority clearly, and I didn't really fit into the gender expectations of the day. But when I watched it, I got very my overwhelming impression was I felt very sorry for Janet and Brad. I was like, they went there and they were subjected to all these perverts,
Hmm.
and it really, really bothered me because I was like, I had sort of conventional morals, and I had like my religious system and everything, but I also was a gender variant person, and that had nothing to do with my sexuality. And there wasn't anything diverse or fluid that way. But I had a fluid gender like all my life, which is a real trans experience. Um, and so when I watched the movie, I just had a reaction like, this is not about me, but this is why people think people like me are perverts. I understood immediately it was a bad representation of people who are gender minorities.
Hmm.
Um, and I just felt like poor Janet and Brad, like they basically got raped, and it was like
I
they
know,
had a
yeah.
really nice, hopeful life, getting married. But I think I was also like wanting that I needed stability, right? Like in Goderich, like or in a small town we grew up in, you couldn't really be living any sort of alternative life. Like you had to get married and stuff. And so I think that I don't know. I was very disappointed because I thought it was gonna be cool and further my knowledge. And I was like, whoa, this is so. Even I think I probably saw it in about 1989, 1990, and I was like, this is
Oh,
passe.
right around the time I saw it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
but I had a
And so
different
I
experience.
recognized it was passe in 1990, and I'm always surprised that people in the queer community think it's really cool today. And it's super popular in the a lot of the people who I know who are polyamorous and into that sort of life choice or whatever or way of living. Um, they love the Rocky Horror Picture Show because it really speaks to them because of the fluidity and the like anything goes kind of thing.
Mhm. Just speaking about Brad and Janet for a moment, you know who they reminded me an awful lot of?
Who?
The couple from Beetlejuice.
Oh,
Yeah, they remind I have to look it up whether Tim Burton was influenced at all. Because think about it, you have this couple, they look kind of similar in a way, the way they're dressed, very conservative, very nice, sort of middle of the road Americans that end up having to put up with this crazy Beetlejuice character who's
yeah.
putting them through the ringer and also guests in their house they don't want there. And and they have to become something they're not. They have to go. So I don't know whether Burton or maybe the person that wrote the script to Beetlejuice. I think it's Daniel Waters wrote that. I wonder if I'm gonna have to look it up if they're influenced by Rock Horror Picture Show. But when I watched the movie again, and it was the first, I've only seen the movie the once with a huge crowd, so it's a different experience. But I watched it again for the purposes of this video. And what struck me is how ahead of the time it was with the fashion, because it came out in 75, but when they were doing the time warp, I really liked the new wave look.
Mhm.
Um, and Frankfurter had a black leather jacket on with all these pins on it, very new wave, because new wave didn't really come out until roughly 76, and then I became aware of it in 79. And of course, alternative music meant so much to me when I was young. It was because I didn't quite have the social skills, I got very into collecting and viewing and researching my culture. So I really like that. It's definitely ahead of its time. I thought the first two acts really moved quickly, the editing and camera work and the songs. I
Mhm.
really liked it. Like I actually liked it more than I thought it would when I was seeing it just by myself, watching it as a typical movie without being in that big audience full of people throwing rice and everything. I did enjoy it. And actually, I think I don't know how you feel about this, but the shadow of David Bowie is really big over the music. Because I saw is it Richard O'Brien that wrote it, right? Richard O'Brien, I think it is.
Yeah, I think,
I,
yeah,
s- I saw some footage of a demo. I think it was I can't remember who was singing the Sweet Transylvanian song. Uh,
yeah.
yeah, that song. I don't know if I have the song title right. Probably everyone knows what I mean. But I heard a demo of that, and it sounded just like it reminded me of Queen Bitch by David Bowie. And
Oh.
yeah, if you listen to it, and then a lot of the songs are very sort of cabaret slash show tune and combined with glam rock. So I think this movie has a lot of transitions. It's transitioning into, so it's like a gateway movie. You're moving
Mhm.
into new wave fashion, but also the music, interesting, is going from a cabaret sort of a cabaret feel, like a music hall feel, into the 70s, but just at the cusp of new wave and a little bit of a punk ethic. Like there are some rhythms in some of the songs, especially Time Warp, and a few others are sort of quick, very punk. So it's like a transitioning. But David Bowie, when he started off, he was really into show tunes and that too. If you listen to his early stuff from the 60s, that he was doing. He was very into an artist called Anthony Newley. So
Mhm.
he liked that show tune sort of thing, music hall sound. So how do you feel about that? What do you get out of the fashion and the music in it?
I think that, I mean, even watching it even now, like, I mean, what people think is cool and what people think is like alternative, even in the queer world, like you see it in the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Yeah.
And I think they got a lot of their looks from the drag community at that time. So specifically, Tim Burton's makeup was done by like a real drag artist. So I think much like you mentioned, disco was happening. Like disco came out of queer, specifically gay male culture. And
Mm,
I think a lot of this fashion and stuff was coming straight out of the drag clubs, and there's a real S&M influence there as well. Um, I do think that it's interesting. It hasn't really moved on. Like in my musical, I actually did a thing where I came out in a corset and I ended up getting dressed up in a complete Victorian dress as a joke to like, there's more ways to have interesting outfits than just all of us wearing lingerie all the time. But
mm,
it even prefigured like the 80s, like Madonna like being outrageous in 1984, where it was outrageous when she wore her bra and she showed her midriff and she was being very revealing. But I mean, that was done 10 years ago in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, like 10 years previous, you know.
mhm,
So it was very ahead of its time. Like it's the fashion relevance hasn't gone away in that show. I mean, and people refer to it like if you show up in a top hat or any kind of glittery gear, people are going to mention to you magenta, which is the character who tap dance, or and like I constantly get people will refer to that movie when they're talking about my outfit.
Oh, right.
Yeah, yeah, it's a huge the reason why I wanted to rewrite it was like I don't understand how in some ways it's very, very influential, and maybe that whole group dynamic where we're all going in as a group together to experience this might be where I'm not able to fall in with the group either. And I think that whole group experience, you're not actually reflecting on the material itself, because it's like when we mentioned Billy Idol and people yelling out, "Hey, get laid." When I heard that, I was like, "This is stupid. It doesn't match the song," because
Yeah.
I was thinking of the meaning of the song. And so, and I think that a lot of these group things, people aren't even thinking about what am I doing or what's the meaning. It's like we're doing this together, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
The
Yeah.
mindlessness of, like the basic activities you're doing without any reflection of and I did read a review with Richard O'Brien, and he was saying sometimes he found the whole group thing to be very intrusive to the actual movie, you know, because people aren't dealing with the material anymore, you know.
Mm.
Anyway, we were talking about the fashion. I don't really know. For me, for the music, um, I didn't like it because I found the really high whiny singing style, which was specific, seemed very specific to the 70s, didn't work for me. The voice, the
All right.
vocals didn't
Yeah,
work like that.
I'm a big fan of 70s music. I used to DJ and do a 60s, 70s, 80s night when I was living in England. I did it in London, England, and so I'm really into the 70s, particularly glam rock. Very,
Ah,
very much
I'm
like
not
that.
into it, dude.
Yeah. Well, that's my own interest. Like collecting glam rock. I collected so many singles and albums because I'm a collector. Once I get into something, once I got into glam rock, I just had to have everything. But especially David Bowie is a major touchstone in my life. So I could see that. I saw a lot of the music. I also think it was obviously very, very influenced by Bob Fosse's Cabaret as well. You know,
Yes.
very much so. He's probably seen that movie. So it brings together, it's interesting how it's brought together so many aspects of like more of an alternative culture into one movie that's become so palatable that so many people have gotten involved with. So I think from my perspective as an autistic person, like initially I had some hesitancy about getting involved in a movie where everyone's yelling at the screen. I didn't understand that, but I
Mm.
see it as an interesting window or gateway into alternative cultures. So I find it interesting from that aspect as a cultural musical curio, definitely that has blended a lot of things together right in the mid 70s and is still being talked about today. So it's really something, but it's not perfect because I think the first two, I alluded to this, the first two acts really moved nicely. And I was really impressed how interested I was, and it was really great. And the songs are great. I'll see how you feel. I think the third act really went down in quality, like the music. Yeah, you're laughing. So yeah, it really went down in quality. And yeah, I heard Brad and Janet as well, what happened to them. I didn't think the ending was that great, but so it doesn't maintain its momentum and the quality of the music went down in the third act. But yeah, other than that, overall I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it watching it again by myself. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. So I would give it would you give it a positive review? Would you recommend it to someone? How would you, yeah, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know. I'm really torn about it because I find the whole sort of theater experience where people go and yell at the screen, and there's a specific script that people. It's not even like original comments yelling at the screen or a lot of original. It's like a lot of it is you can find the script online, like what you need to yell and don't wear stripes and all these things. Um, I do find it problematic because the premise is these people are from transsexual Transylvania, so they're trans people,
Mhm.
and we have mostly cisgender straight people dressing up for a night of kink, and so it is a real sort of wet dream about trans people that isn't true, and it's a very negative stereotype that like one of the common tropes about trans people, and one of the common microaggressions I experience is that people assume I'm really sexually exotic and I'm doing some sort of like really kinky thing in my life, and it's not about sexuality at all, it's about identity. So to me, I call, like, if there was a movie that everybody dressed up as black people and went and yelled at the screen, like, that wouldn't work, and we would know why. So because you don't do blackface, but you can do trans face, and so I have a problem with it. Like, it's an appropriation of a trans idea and trans people, but it's not actually written from that perspective. It's very much written from this is about sex,
Yeah.
so I can see why it works in the queer culture with gay cisgender people and lesbian cisgender people, or anyone in that spectrum who identifies as cisgender, because to them, yeah, it is all about sexuality and this is how I express my identity. But for trans people, it's not so popular. So I think if people are going to go watch the movie, it's good to watch because there is interesting and still relevant material there.
Hmm.
But the group experience, I find people aren't actually thinking about what they're doing and what's going on the screen,
So they would have to do more research. I think it opens the door, but you have to
Yeah.
walk through it and explore the room, or you're gonna make assumptions about a room you haven't seen yet. So I think
Yeah, well, it's
yeah.
a problem because it's one of the most pervasive stereotypes is that trans people, and specifically trans women, are involved in the sex trade and sex workers. And historically, they haven't been able to find jobs. So there is a preponderance of trans women who are involved, and trans people who are involved in the sex trade. But that's now that you can be trans and live and maybe get a job and not be kicked off your workplace and be a normal person like everyone else, because it is normal to be trans. Like, hopefully that stereotype will go the way of the Jewish moneylender. You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
Jews had to do that because that was all they were allowed to do, and then suddenly they became about money. Well, they're not, so, and trans people aren't about sexuality. So I think it was a good movie at the time. I think that it still perpetuates a very dangerous stereotype for me as a trans person. So I get very it's problematic for me that I feel like a lot of people, they just want to dip into it like it's kink, and then they want to get out without actually understanding it. So I
Yeah,
don't
it's
really.
like like I said, dabbling your toes in the dark waters of alternative culture, just to dabble.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
slumming it. You're slumming it for the night with a bunch of trans people who aren't
yeah.
really trans, who are just cisgender queer people.
Is
Yeah.
Frankfurter is he actually transsexual? Because I watched the movie. What do you think?
Well, he says he's a transvestite from transsexual Transylvania.
And I've been to Transylvania. I toured Transylvania.
Did they look
There's
like
there's
that?
nothing very transsexual about Transylvania. It's a lovely place. I loved it. I did
Yeah.
some research for a book I'm writing there. But yeah, that was the only point in the movie that was mentioned, transsexual, but meaning the country. So what do you
Yeah,
think,
well, so
Frankfurt?
they're from transsexual. So that's the planet. So that, like, it's a trans world. So but it's more transvestite. So at the time, the whole transvestite thing was a thing, and this is where I have a really good book called Vested Interests that was written at that time, and especially in music, wearing opposite gender clothing was really outrageous and a form of rebellion, and David Bowie was a big part of that. He pioneered a lot of that, and but now we don't really. I think it's called like cross dressers, right? Like the
Hmm.
cross dressers, but they thought transvestites only were like men dressing as women, like from the research I've done, and they only developed theories around that. So they didn't have theories about any other genders dressing, like, or people dressing like men who might be female or non-binary, because it's normal to want to dress like a man because that's how you get power. So it's very much a weird focus on femininity and how men when they dress in it, what does it mean? And it's usually about sexuality.
Mhm.
It's kind of misogynistic too, because the idea that it's a big deal if you wear women's clothing, but it's not a big deal if a woman wears men's clothing in the same way. You can really see the problematic gender dynamics. You're considered weak if you're putting on women's clothing, but you strengthen yourself if you're putting on men's clothing.
Well, that's
So I think there's a lot of the thinking around being a transvestite has moved on, and so has the language. We don't say transsexual, we don't say transvestite anymore. But cross-dressing still is a thing. There's a lot of people who enjoy doing it, and I support that. Um, but I think it was still in that limited cultural box of the time, which was transvestites are men who get sexual thrills from dressing as women, and that's just no longer. It's the world has opened up way beyond that little box, you know.
because I thought Frankfurter was bisexual. That's the opinion I have because he got together
Well,
with.
I would say he was I'd say he's pansexual
Would you?
because,
Okay, so explain.
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think that because he's even creating, like at that time, they didn't have non-binary in the movie, and they only had male and female. But I think that he was just doing whatever he wanted with anyone, and he was also creating humans, like he created Rocky. So he was making
And
different
Meatloaf
as
previously
well.
tried with the Meatloaf character that comes out of the deep freeze.
Yeah, well, back to that. Like when that was happening, I was like, oh no. Like that you're right. The first part of the movie is really great. And then they kind of lose the plot a bit, you know?
Yeah.
And I don't really know. For me, it was when Meatloaf arrived. I don't think that it
Well,
was.
I think you're right. I think as soon as Brad and Janet were compromised, I think, which was shortly thereafter, yeah, it lost a lot of its momentum. So, because their innocence was lost at that point. So, because it was sort of intriguing because there was this, you had this through line of this innocence in this chaotic alternative environment. And then once the innocence was lost, so where do you go with it? It sort of started to fall apart there.
So, I mean, you mentioned that the movies seem to falter or lose some momentum when Janet and Brad lost their innocence.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that was a problematic scene for me too, because Dr. Frankenfurter deploys deception to seduce both of them. Like he pretends to be, he pretends to be Janet to Brad, and then he pretends to be Brad to Janet. And that's another trope that people who gender minorities are actually deceptive, and trans people are deceivers, and they're really hiding from you who they really are. So the whole idea of, well, you're lying about your private parts, and the whole reveal of you're not really who you say you are. So this whole play around using deception and pretending to be something to get sex is a very pernicious idea about trans people that it's transphobic, frankly. Like, I mean, there's a fear like, well, I need to know your gender, and there can't be any surprises about that, and you need to be clear with me um, with who you are. And this whole idea that people have the right to know, and that people can only be one way is problematic. So that people who are different are perceived as liars, because you cheated me. I thought you fit in my box that I put you in, and you're not in that box, and now I'm sad. So that was really bothersome to me. Um, and I don't know, like I wonder if people care about Janet and Brad, or if they just hate them. Like when I do see clips from the theater experience, or where people are going in groups, like they yell mean things at Janet and Brad. So they seem to be not the heroes of the play,
Yeah,
They're not.
I found it problematic when Janet hooked up with Rocky.
Yeah.
Um, I think the movie started to sputter then. That's in the third act. But I think this idea of the loss of innocence actually goes by someone who's hiding something, goes back to what this movie's parodying, though. It's a parody of, I think, primarily probably Dracula. It brings to mind the Bela Lugosi one, where you have someone presenting himself as being one thing, but who's secretly actually a vampire.
Mhm.
And one of the things that makes the Dracula or vampire lore so potent is this loss of innocence, which is in a lot of horror movies. And the movie also brings to mind House on Haunted Hill, The Haunting, where you have a group of people going to a secluded mansion and having to put up with all these paranormal and bizarre things going on around them. And of course, there's Frankenstein in there,
Yeah.
obviously, as well. So it's parodying all these movies which have something to do with innocence, because in Frankenstein, it's actually the monster who is actually innocent, who's not born a baby, but born
Mhm.
a full-grown man who somehow has to acclimate to the environment around them. So, yeah, I grew
Yeah.
up on these sort of movies. So I could see a lot of that in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Since I grew up watching the Saturday matinees and being autistic, I could relate to a lot of the monsters in these movies because a lot of them were misunderstood quite often,
Yeah.
like they're outside of social norms. So, although it took me quite a while to realize what it was I was really getting out of monster movies, I had to be quite a bit older before I realized what I was really getting out of them, which was sort of an affinity for and a relation to some of the misunderstood monsters in the movies, which I suppose that's why teenagers enjoy monster movies as well. They can relate to a certain extent. But yeah, I do agree the movie started to unwind when that innocence was lost. But
Well, I do want to talk a little, like there actually is a really heavy theme of mining from B movies. Like that was the original idea that Rich O'Brien had, was he loved B movies. So if you listen to the science fiction, the opening song, um, he refers to all these different movies, you know, and all these characters. And one thing that I wrote into my rewrite of Rocky, which was Poppy, was I had King Kong. I had Dr. Kong as a character. I brought in King Kong because he's really big in the movie as well. At the end, Dr. Frankenfurter is actually climbing up the RKO tower, similar, evoking the similar idea of King Kong climbing, I think it was the Empire State Building. And the opening song like refers to Fay Ray, and that Frankfurter wants to be Fay Ray, and this sort of like, I want to be desired by someone, but also the misunderstood and misguided sexuality of King Kong. Like he's basically in love with someone who he can't have because it's not the right species, obviously. So there's this impossible sexual yearning and longing, which is very queer and it can't be met in
same as the
society.
creature from the Black Lagoon,
Yeah,
similar theme in that, which is being remade. I think there's a remake of that coming out soon, but it'll be kind of interesting to see how they remake that movie through a modern lens. But you're right. There's a history of horror of different species or someone totally different being attracted to a so-called normal person and the tension
yeah,
it creates.
yeah. And I think that a lot of from what I noticed just from rewriting, and people didn't understand, why is there a monkey in there? It's just, you're just being funny. And it's like, well, no, actually in Rocky Horror, King Kong, you know, and cheesy night B movie characters are huge, you know, and so that I think there's more to the movie than the group experience lets people
You
understand.
have to dive deeper. Like I said, it just opens, this is a gateway to another
Yeah.
culture. But once you open that door or open that gate and go through to the garden or the room, you got to
Hmm.
explore that a bit more. Like that's good. We're really diving deep into this. So that's good. You have to sort of dive deep into it. I think people, when they're experiencing it as a communal or almost a tribal experience altogether, shouting and yelling and throwing things at the screen, it obviously distracts. You can't pick up on the nuances and
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and like, I mean, that I was thinking when it's similar to, you know, political parties. Like there's people who actually think about who they're voting for and what they're doing. And then there's people who just show up, you know, and they're like rah, 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 and they're not even, they just like, I like this person and I'm not gonna look at their policies or anything like that. Like there's, I guess, the deep thinkers, and then there's just the followers, you know?
And
Yeah. I mean, there's always more depth to be had if you want to go there, but
There is, but as they say, they claim that ignorance is bliss, right? So, I mean, I'm sorry, I can't. Maybe that's why I've never been blissful. I was thinking deeply on these things. I can't help it. That's my autistic mind. I'm always thinking about many things at once and trying to put everything into a socio-cultural context and getting all the information I can. So, so what prompted you to make your play? We'll talk about your play a little bit. Maybe we can even show some scenes from it.
I'll start talking about it. So I rewrote Rocky and I called it Poppy because my Poppy horror, like horror, WHORE, because I thought, first of all, well, this has become part of popular culture. And also about how popular culture tends to whore out alternative cultures and pimp them out, you know? So I was like, you know, trans people are still being exploited as kinky and sexual to popular culture. So that was my underlying idea. So I rewrote it basically that there was two trans people heading to a clinic, like a Dr. Frankenstein style clinic, and it was completely run by cisgender medical people and all the gatekeeping that happens there. And we rewrote the time warp into the "What's in Your Pants" dance, which went over really well. And I just rewrote the songs and the perspective from the horrible things that were happening were some of the gender assumptions and crazy ideas that cisgender people do towards trans people. And there was a big reveal where there was cannibalism involved, like in
In
Rocky.
the movie.
Yeah, yeah, and they were like
They
feeding off.
ate meatloaf.
Yeah, they ate meatloaf. So
Actually,
I actually wrote out meatloaf because I just found that it was a waste. So I just what I did was there was a reveal that in Poppy, the cisgender people were really pressuring trans people to have surgeries because they wanted to eat their flesh. So they wanted to like cut your genitals off or change things about your body, and because we can eat them. So that was the big reveal. And we went straight to from that to I used a Deus Ex Machina. I don't know if I say that right, you know, because I felt like in the movie, the whole like, oh, and now we're from outer space. That was kind of like suddenly God came down and rescued them, you know, like in Greek theater.
yeah.
It was kind of a cop out at the ending, I found. I don't know. But then it was also very campy and B movie, which is probably that is what they were going for. So I do have a picture of the cast that I can show you. We based it in, I'm just trying to get on the share screen. We
So
based it
while
in
you're waiting for that, when they consume the flesh of the trans gender people, is that meant to be a metaphor for consuming their culture?
absolutely, yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
not actual cannibalism, it's more of a metaphor. Okay.
Yeah, and yeah, so this is obviously the way I asked them to pose ridiculous. So this is the cast, and I'm dressed in, so I'm playing Dr. Frankenfurter. My character is Dr. Steamy Frank,
Right.
and I'm playing I'm
You
a
have a
my
pirate hat on there. Is that an Adam and the Ants influence?
no, it was just what I had, and I decorated that up a little bit more. I have a more fabulous hat in the actual show. But the joke was instead of being a sweet transsexual from transsexual Transylvania, a sweet transvestite, I was a sissy cis crossdresser from cissexual Victoriana. So I was from the Victorian
Awesome.
era. So I had people, I came out of my corset and lingerie, and then during the song, the famous song, I got dressed in a full Victorian dress. So I had like I had hoop skirts and petticoats and ridiculous stuff. So it was very campy and stupid, but yeah,
And you
I
put
did.
this on all places in the city of Hamilton, Steel Town. And
Yeah,
how was it received?
it was very well received. We got really great reviews, and people said that it was very funny. And I think that you only have 15 minutes to set up and to take down, but we acted like it was a real professional show. So We had a lot of props, a lot of costume change, so it looked like a real musical. It's a first iteration. I'm going to keep workshopping it. And all the reviews we got, they said this needs to be developed. So I'm going to be working on developing it because I think that I was able to center the trans gays in Rocky and take the good things out of Rocky and leave sort of the tropes and bad things behind.
Mhm.
But it's also, I mean, we make fun of everyone, including trans people in the play because it is campy and draggy. So yeah.
It's
But the end,
interesting. You made a parody of a parody.
yeah.
So that's interesting.
Yeah, and we based it, we did 80s new wave music. So I rewrote the songs, but we used the same framework, obviously, and the same tunes, but we used 80s conventions for pop music and new wave. So a lot of Simple Minds, a lot of Soft Cell was in there.
Oh, favorites of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, but also Madonna and
Wow.
Oh Mickey. Yeah, so the Janet and Brad song, like Janet, damn it, Janet, we wrote what are you gonna do to pass? And they were singing back together, like, how are you gonna pass? I'm gonna put needles in my ass. Like, so we did that, but it from a different perspective. Yeah.
Okay. So should we let end off with our final thoughts on the original Rocky Horror Picture Show? Uh,
Yeah, well, I
let's
mentioned to
give
you,
a
like,
go ahead.
I don't know if I liked the I was a little like the ending, I was a little disappointed. It was also a little they ended it rather abruptly, and the whole message that queer people or the different people are aliens could be problematic, but it could also be true to how people really feel. Like you do feel like an alien when you don't fit into like neurotypical society, you know? Um, I don't know. For me, I would give it like maybe um Hmm. I would give it a 5 because I just feel like it hasn't aged well. And I feel like there's parts of it that are 10, like really amazing to watch, but it's not actually that great to watch overall. I mean, if you're watching it alone, it's not as much fun, I'm sure, as going to the group thing.
No. Yeah, I would give it probably a little higher, 6.5 to a 7. Because the first two acts were great. Like I said, it floundered in the third act. But I can see having grown up throughout the 70s and the 80s and loving that sort of music and culture, I can just see it being sociocultural magpie. Like there's so many different things incorporated into the film that I could tease out of it.
Mhm.
And I do think once again it's like a gateway or a doorway to alternative culture. It was way ahead of its time. I tend to like anything that's way ahead of its time, or anything that was like the progenitor of a scene or the gateway to a scene. So yeah, it's I would give it a 6.5 to 7 out of 10, somewhere in there. So
Mhm.
any final thoughts before we leave off on our first podcast?
Yeah, well, I think that it is a gateway in some areas, especially with fashion and making people think about um who do you want to be, and don't just dream it, be it. Like those are amazing messages, and what all the different cultural milestones that are in it. I do think that it's important to realize that it also confirmed a lot of the gender binary and a lot of the male female dynamics that were going on at the time, and those things still you need to be challenged today because people, so there's some assumptions from the movie that make people comfortable and you don't need to think.
Mm.
So I just encourage people when they watch it to think about, you know um does this work, for what we know today about trans people. Like it probably couldn't be written today, but I think that it is. I wish that it wasn't so unquestioned. I think you can watch it, but use it as a questioning thing. And probably when it came out, it made people question things. And I think Rocky is open to being questioned as well.
Mm. Yeah, I think from my autistic standpoint, it's a rich experience in that, being a film buff, I tend to be a collector of memorabilia, a collector. And I look deeply into culture. I'm very into culture since I don't socialize as much. I'm very into culture. It's the way it's always been, especially in my high school years. I would spend time watching lots of movies, taking in lots of different music. Plus, I like anything alternative that goes against the mainstream. I just tend to be that way since I'm neurodivergent. So, to me, it's a rich experience. There's a lot to read into, a lot to see. So I think it's worth seeing, especially for someone of my age, just because you can realize and see all these different elements that go into it. Everything from Bowie to other glam rock to new wave, and then the B movie references. Yeah, quite a lot to enjoy. So I would give it, like I said, a 6.5 or 7 out of 10. So I guess
Mhm.
that brings us to the end of our first podcast. And
Yeah.
we'll be back, siblings on the spectrum. We'll be back with our deep analysis of some other socio-cultural issue in our next episode. Okay,
Okay.
we bid farewell.
Bye.